Fabulous. Thank you, everybody, for being here. I'm Maria Bernier. I am the State Data Coordinator for the Connecticut State Library. My pronouns are she and her, and we are here today to talk about changes to the annual report, and I'm glad you're here. I want to reassure you, all of the information that I'm about to show you is available to you online, including all the slides, more details about what the changes in the questions are. So you do not have to write down everything I say if you don't want to. It's available to you online. Also would like to point out that we do have the live captions running. If you find those to be useful, go ahead and activate them. If you find them annoying, go ahead and turn them off and get them out of the way. But they are available in case anybody wants them. All right, and I think we are ready to get started. That's the housekeeping. I am going to keep an eye on the chat. So if you have questions as we go along, please drop them in the chat. That would be fabulous, and I will address those as I see them pop up. We will take some time to go through the changes in the slides today. I'm also going to show you our LibGuides and where all of this information lives. So that's what we're covering today. All right, so I always like to start these webinars with a reminder of the difference between the big state annual report that we're talking about today and your own reports. So for the context, our state report data is collected so that we can send it to the Institute of Museum and Library Services for inclusion in their public libraries survey. And as you may remember, this is a survey of all of the public libraries nationwide. So, right, every state, many of the territories, thousands of libraries across the country. And we, in many cases, ask the same set of questions. So any question that is part of the public library survey is a question that every library across the country is going to answer, right? It's a consistent set of questions, and it doesn't change very often because it takes a long time to change questions. The process is that somebody will propose a change, whether it's a new question or a tweak to an existing question. There's a lot of kind of research gathering. There's a lot of testing of how to ask the question, what the definitions mean, really tweaking of all of that. And IMLS has a consulting group that will even do some sort of testing, like live data testing with some public libraries to see how they're interpreting the new questions. And then that new question or the change actually goes to vote with the state librarians and the state data coordinators. And so as long as 2/3 of the states vote in favor of a change, it happens. And recently, most of them have been changing and have been happening, but it's not a done deal, right? There have been occasions recently where we voted not to accept a change. So it can take 2 to 3 years, if not more, to add or change questions that are included in the public library survey. So that's what they are. I can't mess with them. If something comes to us from IMLS for inclusion in the public library survey, that's the question I'm going to ask you. However, we also have the option in our own state surveys to add local questions, so Connecticut specific questions, and we do that. Obviously, you'll see those in the annual report, like the whole section about salaries and positions is specifically for use in Connecticut. I don't send that information to IMLS. And there are several other questions throughout the report that are really for our purposes within the state. And those are the questions that I have some latitude over. So those are the questions that we can remove or add or tweak, either me in consultation with Dawn and Deborah, or in some cases getting feedback from you guys, which is what I did this spring when I sent out a survey asking whether you actually used the data that we collected in some of the questions. And that influenced some of the changes that we'll hear about over the next 45 minutes or so. So that's the state report, really federal questions, some statewide questions. And that's in contrast with your reports. And your reports are totally up to you. You can collect whatever data you want for those. And I encourage you to do that because you know your library and your stakeholders and what's important to your community, and you know how to tell your story. So I encourage you, please keep better reference statistics than I'm asking you for, right? I'm only asking you for one big number of reference transactions for the entire year. And there's a lot more happening than that. And you know that in your library. So that's the kind of thing where you can collect more detailed information. Or in other cases, I heard of a library that does automatic renewals. And the board was interested in comparing the number of initial circulations, right? So the initial checkouts, and comparing that with the total circulation, which included auto renewals. So that library is tracking a couple extra numbers that they're not reporting on their state report. It's really for internal purposes. So I encourage you to do that. Collect whatever data you want for your own use, and you hang on to that. But it helps you tell your story to your stakeholders, your funders, your board, your capital F friends, all of those. So that's kind of the distinction. My report is sometimes inflexible because of the PLS, but your reports are up to you. So that's why we are dealing with what we're dealing with. And now in the annual report, there is a column right there, the very first column when you open the report on the left-hand side, to tell you where that question comes from. So if the abbreviation is US, that means it's a national question that comes to us from IMLS for inclusion in the public library survey. I cannot change any of those questions. I can't eliminate them. I can't make them into something else. Those are the questions that I need to ask in order to do my job. Now, there are a lot of questions with an F, and those are feeder questions that sort of feed into a national question. And so there I'm collecting smaller pieces that add up to a question that I'm reporting to the public library survey. And we do that because in Connecticut, we've become accustomed to having really interesting reports and charts and really being able to look at our data in a more granular way. And so I will collect a lot of that feeder information because it adds up into an IMLS question, but it also gives me great data to give back to you for your stakeholders. So those feeder questions, you'll see a lot in the survey. There are many of those in different sections. So those are there. Now, if you see something that starts with an abbreviation CT, that obviously is a Connecticut specific question, right? So that's something that I can change or add, subtract. So those are questions that we'll have in. Often they're kind of clarifying questions or a little bit more information about what's happening in your library. So here's an example in the finance section. This is sort of an income section for federal government income. And you'll see we ask about your federal income and how much you're getting. And we want to know which came from an LSTA grant and how much came from other federal sources. And then in Connecticut, we're just curious about what those sources are. And then it adds up to this one, 8.6 here. This is a question that goes to the public library survey. And that's a very specific question that they're looking for. So that's what it looks like when you open the annual report. These are some changes I made last year just to help you understand where the questions come from and why we're asking them. So here is the red letter information that everybody came for, right? You want to know what the new deadline is, and that is November 1st. So this is a change. This gives me a couple of extra weeks to really compile all of your information. So what happens is I get 177 annual reports from public libraries over the course of the summer and up until the deadline. And I double check all of the data that you send me. I try to see if it makes sense with what you've reported in the past and whether it's consistent, whether it makes sense in the context of your population, that kind of thing. So sometimes I follow up with questions. Some of you may have experienced that. But then I take everybody's data and I smush it into the statistical profile. So there's a lot of data cleanup that goes into that. Again, making all the numbers fairly consistent and putting them into the same format. So that takes me a lot of time. And then I have to take all of that data and put it into the chart and report creators and our advocacy flyers and all of the great resources that I'm able to give back to you for use in your budget processes. So I tend to get questions starting in early to mid-December from library directors who are looking for all of those reports and all of those chart and report creators and the advocacy flyers. And I don't have them usually because I don't have all the data. You know, when the old deadline was November 15th, that did not give me much time in order to get all the information, compile it, and feed it back. So with the new deadline of November 1st, that gives me a little bit more cushion to make sure that I can get you the tools that you need in time for budget season to advocate for your library. So that's why we've got our new deadline, November 1st, and that will be the deadline going forward. So let's talk about the new Connecticut questions. There are just 2 of these. As I mentioned, these are Connecticut specific, and hopefully they're pretty quick yes/no questions. You don't have to count anything here. The first one is really hopefully a quick yes/no. Does your library have an equity, diversity, and inclusion plan? And don't go too crazy if you call it a diversity, equity, and inclusion plan. That's okay. That's a yes. So whatever conglomeration of themes and abbreviations you use, if maybe you've got a social justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion plan, that's a yes. Maybe you have a diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility plan. Awesome. That's a yes. So what we're really trying to do is just get at which libraries, how many libraries are moving in this direction to have an EDI plan. Hopefully that's a quick yes or no for your library. The second new question is whether your library is compliant with the Children's Internet Protection Act. And this question replaces 2 that we took out. So remember, we used to ask you how many computers were filtered in the children's room and how many computers were filtered in the teen and adult areas. And I asked in the survey, and the majority of libraries, at least 2/3, said that they didn't really use that information. And we felt that this question about SEPA would be a little bit more applicable because a lot of libraries are heading in this direction of being SEPA compliant in order to use their federal funding for internet access and devices that access the internet. So here are the 3 requirements in order to be SEPA compliant. And these are also listed in the form, just in case you need that reminder of what SEPA compliance means. And there's a link here, as well as on the LibGuide and a couple other places, helping you understand what is the Children's Internet Protection Act, what does that mean, what does it entail, and that's information from ALA. They've, of course, got a lot to say about it. So these are the 3 criteria for SEPA compliance: an internet safety policy, a technology protection measure, which we usually call a filter. And if your library is a CEN customer, you probably have your filter operational, or you could have it operating for free. CEN offers that to their customers. And then their 3rd criteria is that you would have a meeting about your internet safety policy and your filter at a public meeting, could be a board meeting, any of those things. So we're headed in a direction of asking about SEPA compliance and not those more specific questions about how many computers you filter. So that's the change. All right, heading into the new questions from IMLS. And as I mentioned, these go into the public library survey. So these are nationwide questions that we all have to answer. And every library across the country is answering these. So IMLS sets these age ranges, right? So they are the ones who have determined that we're breaking programs down into ages 0 to 5 for children, or children ages 6 to 11. So the 0 to 5 age range tends to be sort of early literacy programs. That could be a story time. Those tend to be the early ages children programs. And then you might have programs for the slightly older kids, however that is. Now, I know that there are many libraries that divide their programs into different age ranges, which is totally up to you. You can do that. But for the purposes of the annual report that we are submitting to IMLS, I need your data in these age ranges. So if you're using the spreadsheet I provided for tracking your programs and activities, it will help you do this. It forces you to choose an age range, one of these, for counting your programs. So say, for instance, you're doing a kids program and maybe you say it's ages 6 to 12, then you would use a children's age range instead of the teen or YA range. So Pick the age range that is most appropriate for the program that you're offering, but we are separating out the kids this year. So you'll be counting the number of programs that you're offering for each age group, as well as the attendance at those programs. And remember, as always, you're reporting the total attendance at the program, regardless of the age of the people who show up, right? It's about the intended audience. So if you've got story time, you're probably aiming it at kids 2 to 3 years old or thereabouts. So you're counting the kids who show up as well as their grown-ups and caregivers. Everybody gets counted as attendance for that particular program. That's how those work. Okay, also from IMLS, this is a new question. They're really interested in library fines, and what they would love to do is ask you whether your library is fine free or not, but that has so many levels to it, right? So maybe you're like 99% fine free, where you're only charging late fees on a tiny number of items, but you're primarily fine free for all of your circulating materials and print books and ebooks and things like that. It becomes a really tough thing to measure once you start breaking it down. It's a number of little details. So what IMLS said is basically, let's keep it top level. Is your library charging overdue fines to any users, which means any age, when they fail to return their physical print materials by the due date? So if you charge fines for print books or magazines, you would say, yes, we charge overdue fines. If you waive fines for all ages for print materials, then you would say no. Hopefully that will be a quick yes or no question for you guys as well. Okay, I'm keeping an eye on the chat, and I must be wowing you with all of this information and bowling you over. Ask me questions if you think of them as we go. So now I want to head into two sort of changes, two question changes that you should start counting this July 1st to include in your annual report next year. And I know that's thinking like way ahead, because we're still dealing with this fiscal year, and I'm asking you to think about next fiscal year and that report, and that's like millions of years away. But I would like you to start counting these on July 1st. So please let your coworkers know, spread the word to everybody. You are my advocates among the library community. We'll count these now on July 1st for the next fiscal year to report in the next annual report. And the first one of those is a change from IMLS regarding their pre-recorded programs. And you'll remember this is something we started counting, I think it was just a year ago, where we count the number of programs that you record and post online. And we're also counting the number of times those recordings are watched. And IMLS uses the word views. So you're counting the number of views after 30 days now. This is a change. We used to count it over 7 days. And that was a really short period of time. And a lot of libraries pushed back on that, because you all know, and you've seen probably from your usage statistics, that sometimes those videos take a couple days to catch on. And sometimes people are finding it in week 2 or week 3 and really enjoying it. So now you get to count the number of times somebody watches your video for that full 30 days. And that really gets you the initial response as well as a little bit of a tail there. So just update your procedures on how you're counting these views. There is still information online about where you can find those counts on various platforms. This URL is here, and it'll be in the PDF slides on our LibGuide, and it's also on the LibGuide in a few places, which I'll show you when we get there later on. So there is help for where to find those numbers, but you'll count them for 30 days now. Now, this is a brand new question in Connecticut that I'd love you to start counting as of July 1st. So this is something you'll want to share with your reference staff, with anybody who's doing these kind of one-on-one tech consultations, where you're going to count any interaction between a library staff member and a patron. So remember, that could be any library staff member, right? It's not necessarily a reference staff. Sometimes this happens at the tech desk. Sometimes it happens at the circ desk, right? Where there's an interaction between a staff member and a patron. Doesn't matter if you scheduled it as a book librarian or whether somebody just walked in and it's completely unscheduled, but your staff member is spending a considerable amount of time tutoring or teaching the patron about information technology or digital literacy skills. So this is that real one-on-one time where the staff person is guiding them through how to use a device or how to do something. There's usually conversation back and forth and instruction. So some examples, really typical examples, somebody needs help using the desktop computer at your library, right? Or a laptop. Somebody comes in with a new e-reader or a smartphone and says, oh my gosh, my kids just gave this to me. I don't know what to do with it. How do I navigate this thing? And you're doing a one-on-one consultation to guide them through that device. You might be helping somebody create an email address so that they can apply for jobs or apply for appointments. You might be helping them set up a social media account. So maybe somebody wants to learn how to do FaceTime or Zoom. That's a one-on-one tech consultation. You might be helping people on websites, online applications. Maybe you're using Microsoft Word, teaching them how to do that for a resume. And it could be anything, right? It doesn't have to be for job. It doesn't have to be for the DMV. It could be for fun, but it's that one-on-one interaction where you're really consulting with the patron and teaching them something. Now, these are reference transactions. So if we look at the IMLS questions and definitions, reference transactions does include one-on-one tech consultations. So I am guessing, I am hoping that at your reference desk or wherever you have some kind of categories for the types of reference questions that you answer, right? There might be a reader's advisory category where you check off the number of reader advisory questions you get. There might be a local history and genealogy category. There might be a, I don't know what else you do. There might be a business support category, and you'll add one-on-one tech consultations. So this is a subset of your reference transactions, and you will eventually count these in your annual report as part of the reference questions. So let me head over to the chat because I see there's a lot of questions that came in. Okay, should you include sessions with your digital navigator clients there? Yes, those are one-on-one tech consultations. So if you have a specific digital navigator program, if you call this book a librarian, if you call this, I don't know, everybody's got different words for it, right? So whatever the name for it is, go ahead and count it. Question in the chat, does this include volunteers or only staff? This includes staff members for the time being. So an interaction between library staff member and patron. But that's an interesting concept, Karen, that you may have volunteers. And perhaps I'm thinking this could be like a teen volunteer thing, right? Where there are kids who are doing community service hours or helping out with like the YA advisory board who are doing these one-on-one consultations. That's an interesting concept. So for the time being, we're going to count library staff members because that's the criteria we also use for reference transactions. So reference transactions are about staff and patrons, and likewise tech consultations are about staff and patrons. So you will not include the interactions between volunteers for the time being, but that's an interesting concept and I appreciate you raising that for the future. Another question, would this include help printing, faxing, scanning? So you will remember that in reference transactions, we don't count things that are called directional questions. And directional questions include, where's the restroom? Where do I find Jane? Can you help me find the 700s? And can you help me make a photocopy? So that would be a directional question. So often in libraries where you're counting reference questions, you may also be counting directional questions. So if someone needs help printing, faxing, or scanning, you will count that as a directional question. Okay. Question in the chat for libraries doing a temporary grant funded program such as digital navigators. Should we count those consultations? That is a yes. Go ahead and count those. Another question in the chat, we have a structured program with student volunteers who offer that service. Do we count those sessions? So if those students are volunteers, you are not counting those sessions for the time being. We're only counting library staff. Question in the chat, could you please define a considerable amount of time? Showing how to create an email could be just a few minutes to get them started versus walking through the entire process. There's no definition of considerable amount of time. There's no like 15 minutes versus 14.5 minutes. It's about the interaction. So if this is an easy yes, no question, to me, that's not a consultation. That's not a considerable amount of time. So if someone says, where's the on button? And you show them the on button and they walk away, I personally would not count that as a one-on-one tech consultation. That feels almost like a directional question. But where you want to look at it is that dialogue between the library staff member and the patron, where they are talking, asking questions, responding, where the staff member is really teaching and guiding them through the process. It could take less time, it could take more time, right? You could get the same question from two different people, and one person gets the answer really quickly and one person needs a little more guidance. So it's not about measuring, it's about that interaction and going through the full process, making sure that all of the information is communicated and that your patron is able to do what they need to do by the time they're done with the consultation. So that's the understanding. Question in the chat, can this be done during stats week only? I don't know what that is. So you mean that you are measuring your reference transactions for like 1 week or 1 week per quarter, perhaps over the course of the year, and then using that as a sort of statistical average and extrapolating that over the course of the year. You could do that in the same way that you count your reference transactions that way. I feel like that is going to lead you toward miscounting. I know that in the annual report, we do allow that option. We do ask you, is your count of reference transactions based on a typical week, or is this an actual count? I have been hearing from a lot of libraries that those estimates are not as accurate as actually counting. So I encourage everybody to count actual things, whether it's reference or people or anything like that. Another question in the chat, what do you consider a considerable amount of time? We've talked about that. A question in the chat, should we count the service if it's offered off-site? Absolutely, right. In the same way that you would count a reference transaction, whether it is offered over email or chat or phone or in person, or whether if you're doing a reference transaction at the farmer's market, go ahead and count those, right? Because you're doing your library service. So you would count your one-on-one tech consultations, whether they happen physically in your library or anywhere else that you're offering library services at a different location. Okay, great. I think I got to all the questions that I see. Thanks, Karen, for the confirmation on that you have high school student volunteers doing these consultations. That's an interesting thought, a good twist. All right, I think I got everybody. If I said something that wasn't unclear, please go ahead and ask me in the chat or follow up with me by email. That would be fabulous. We will move on from there. I do want to tell you about some questions that I deleted in Connecticut. And you're going to, in your evaluation of this, you're going to say, that was the least helpful thing that you told me today. And then you're going to come back to me and say, where's that question that I answered last year? And it will be a deleted question. So just take note for your own purposes that I did eliminate some questions, some Connecticut specific questions from the annual report. So we're getting rid of a couple of questions about curbside service and what dates you offered it and whether it's for residents or non-residents. As I mentioned, we're getting rid of those questions about how many computers were filtered. And we're also getting rid of 2 questions about whether you did interlibrary loans from out-of-state libraries, because I asked and most libraries said that they don't really use that data. And if you're not using it, there's really no reason to ask you. So we got rid of those. That's some good news, hopefully decreasing your workload marginally. Now I want to talk about COVID-19 a lot of the questions are still here for the third year, which is kind of annoying that we're dealing with this, but most of them are yes, no questions, and they will be fairly familiar at this point, hopefully quick and easy. There are only two that actually require some counting. You'll remember the number of weeks your library was physically closed due to COVID. So I suspect this will not be a big deal in this fiscal year. Most of our libraries were open. COVID was less of a factor in this fiscal year, but it could be that you had a little breakthrough amongst the staff and you closed for a week just to make sure that everybody was okay. So in that case, you would say you were closed for a week and open for the other 52 weeks. Likewise, you may have had limited occupancy due to COVID this fiscal year, and that's not just limited capacity. That's not just a maximum capacity limit. According to IMLS, this limited occupancy concept also includes appointment only use of your library or visitor time limits or closed stacks, closed meeting rooms. Those also would count as limited occupancy. So if in this fiscal year you encountered some of those conditions, you would just let me know what the number of weeks that happened as well. Okay, Lynn, will there still be any questions about curbside? There will, and I will get to those in a sec. So hang on one sec. A couple of Connecticut questions. Oh, here they are. So these two questions were Connecticut specific. We did ask about whether your library, if you wanted to give us the number of transactions for curbside or the number of patrons. So these two are still optional. These are an opportunity for you to just give us these numbers. So if you're doing curbside or outdoor service still, which many libraries are, you can give us the number of transactions or the number of patrons or both, totally up to you. I think a lot of libraries will be continuing curbside service or outdoor service through lockers or some other way like that. This has been an interesting thing to watch over time, and I'm curious about how many libraries are still doing it. Okay, there is some rearrangement and some renumbering. So if you printed out your annual report from previous years, you may see this year that some of the questions are in different locations. So that's what this is about. And it's because I'm trying to bring a lot of things into section 6. That's where the COVID questions are, but I would like to transition that into the section about social justice, equity, diversity, inclusion, accessibility, all of those concepts that libraries are really starting to integrate into their procedures, policies, and their services going forward. So that new question that I mentioned in Connecticut, yes, no, about whether your library has an EDI plan, that's now in section 6. And I'm going to be moving the two new questions about whether your library lends computers and hotspots. So those will also be in section 6. And I'm compiling the questions about fines there. So you'll remember we have the new IMLS question, yes, no, are you charging fines for print materials? And then our two Connecticut questions about your typical fine for books and your typical fine for DVDs. So those will be together. And there are some COVID-19 questions that I would actually like to hang on to in future years, because they're really about these wonderful extension of services that we sort of saw instigated by COVID that are sticking around for a while and really increasing the accessibility of your library and your collections. And that includes those online card registrations, curbside service or outdoor service, and your outdoor Wi-Fi access that has been so wonderful in making the internet available to people who either don't want to come in for whatever reason or are using that Wi-Fi access outside of library hours. So section 6 is going to change a little bit over time, but that there are some different question numbers and locations for some questions. So just be careful as you're going along. Okay, now I'm going to talk about some clarifications and reminders that I told you about last year. So if you attended this webinar last year, where I talked about changes to the annual report, you will hear me repeating myself. So if you have heard this before, feel free to go about your day, drop out of the Zoom. Thank you for being here. but I am going to say things that I told people last year because they're still important, and it's the programs. So remember how I said earlier, these program questions and the age ranges come from IMLS. I can't change them. So I know that they don't match what your library does. We're all going to have to manage. Do your best, smushing your numbers into what IMLS requires. Do your best. That's all I can ask. But I do want to remind you that there is a spreadsheet. There is a tool for helping you track all of these complicated program and activity questions that we have now. This is available to you online. It's really helpful. And if you're not using it, I really think you should be. I think you should tell your staff about it, encourage everybody to use it, because it's going to make your annual report so much easier to do. There's the Excel spreadsheet the link where you can find the spreadsheet. There's videos on how to use it. There's slides on how to use it. There's 3 webinars, I think, on how to use it. So there's a lot of guidance on how to keep track of your programs. So I encourage you to do that. And just as a reminder about programs, we have 4 different formats for your programs. They could be in-person on-site or in-person off-site. They could be live virtual programs, right, where you're live streaming something that happens, or they could be pre-recorded programs, right? So those recordings that you're posting online for people to watch at any time, and you're going to count a program only once. And libraries are starting to develop hybrid programming where you've got people on site in person, right? So maybe you're doing a wonderful music concert and you've got people in the auditorium, and you're also live streaming it because now you have the technology and the know-how to do that. And you're putting it out there on your Facebook page or wherever, YouTube, for people to watch at the same time that it's happening. That's a hybrid program. And then maybe you are sharing the recording afterward, because you can do that. So in that case, you pick only one program type, and we always defer to the in-person programs because that's really how it all happens, is the in-person on-site program. So you can count it as only one program, but you get to count the people who attended in person. You get to count the people who attended the live stream. And later, you get to count the number of people who watched the recording over 30 days. So that gives you a lot of bang for your buck for those programs. And the spreadsheet will help you track all of that information. And remember your audience ages. These are our years for the programs that we're counting, our audiences. IMLS has this wonderful general interest category, which is really the intergenerational, the family, the all ages. This could be a PG movie that you're showing for everybody. It's really an all ages kind of thing. This could be chess club, right? It could be, again, a music concert that everybody can come to. So those are your audience age ranges, the age of the primary intended audience for your program. And we also have self-directed activities, which are different from programs. So you'll see online and in the annual report, programs are really about bringing a group of people together for a specific purpose, whereas the self-directed activities are more like take and makes, grab and goes, where the library staff are preparing something and then the patrons are really kind of doing that activity on their own without the expectation of staff interaction. There are a number of examples online about what those activities are, but you'll count those for each age range and you'll count the number of participants in those activities as well. Also want to remind you about this annual public service hours. As it has always been, these public service hours are when your building is open to the public. So those are your posted hours of opening. As a reminder, maybe your library staff shows up to work at 9 o'clock, but the building doesn't open to the public until 10. So you're not counting that initial hour as part of your public service hours, even though you're all in there working, right? You're in there busting your butts, you're already answering reference questions by email, you're already doing all kinds of fabulous stuff. But you're only going to be counting the public service hours when your building is open to the public according to your posted hours. And if there's minor variations, like for a staff meeting or something, Don't worry about getting all of those and subtracting them, those 2 hours and adding in 2 hours. Just go with your basic schedule. Also, the number of weeks open means the number of weeks your building was open to the public, right? So this open to the public means the door is unlocked, members of the public are coming in, they're coming in your threshold, coming right into the building, you're open to the public. So that's what you're counting there. And you will count all the weeks your library was open for half or more of the scheduled hours. So that's our criteria there. Another reminder on your library visits, I think, is the words we use in the annual report. You might call it your door count, your people count. You're counting everybody who comes into the library for any purpose. So this does include the copier repair guy, the water guy, anybody who's coming in, you can count them as part of your door count. But obviously you're not counting people who use curbside service or drive-through window service, because they are not coming into your library, right? They are not entering your library. They're just using the curbside service. But we have other questions in the annual report where you can count those people. So go ahead, count them up, put them in the annual report. The curbside people are just going to be in a different question than the library visits, which counts the people who enter your building. Interlibrary loans does include transactions between libraries in the same consortium. So for instance, if you are part of a consortium that uses the same ILS, you're all using the same catalog, but you're sending books between libraries on a patron request, those count as interlibrary loans. So go ahead and count those. Likewise, if you let your patrons place holds and the books are going between libraries, you're going to count those. As a reminder, you never count borrow-it loans. Remember, those are where an individual who is a non-resident of your town comes into your library with their hometown library card and wants to borrow something on your shelf. That is a borrow-it loan. That is not an interlibrary loan. ILLs are between libraries, right? Library to library. A borrow-it loan is a loan to an actual patron. So you would not count those. You will not also count CLC swaps or media circuits or any loans you get from us at the Middletown Library Service Center, as usual. So here's a little screenshot of our LibGuide, which we will take a look at shortly. I just want to kind of guide you through that and show you where all this information is. But that's the link, and you'll get this link a little bit later on at about noon today by email. And some general reminders. The survey form itself has so much information in it. When you open it up, you're going to start with the instructions and definitions page. If you print that out, that's actually 9 pages worth of information. So there are a lot of definitions in there. I encourage you to take a look at them. You do not have to read them or memorize them. Like, I don't do that. But if I have a question, that's a great place to start. Like, what do we mean by this concept? Go back into the definitions and take a look. Also, in the form itself, where the questions and answers are, there are a ton of instructions built in there. There's a lot of pop-up comment boxes. They're kind of marked by a tiny little red triangle in the upper corner. If you hover over that question, the comment box will open up and you'll get to see a lot more information. Please let your coworkers know about this, as well as about all of the changes that we talked about today, because they're not here, right? So they need to know this information as well. I hear from several directors who sort of distribute parts of the survey to their staff, right? So parts of the report might go to the finance person, parts might go to the circulation people, parts might go here, and it's kind of a distributed workload, which I love, and I think that's the smart way to do it. But just make sure that everybody has the same information about how to find the pop-up boxes, how to find definitions, where to find all that information. So, and you can use Control F. You can do a find keyword search in the definitions as well as in the survey to find those things. So you can search for PPP, you could search for ARPA, you can search for construction. All those wonderful terms are in there and available to you. Also, I would like to encourage you not to wait until the last minute, either to start your report or to submit your data, because as we've seen over the past couple of years, stuff happens, right? Like all of a sudden life changes and the library is closed and the stuff that you thought you had access to, you don't. So, and that can happen with anything, right? It doesn't have to be a national and a global pandemic. It could just be that you get sick or somebody breaks a leg or anything. So please don't wait until the last minute. It's stressful for everybody. I encourage you to start early. Also want to tell you about some more webinars that I have coming up. So later in July is a new webinar called Managing Your Library Data. And this taps into the brain power of some library peers across the state who will be showing us their spreadsheets and their tools for keeping track of their library data each month and over the course of the year. So these are some great people to steal ideas from just for keeping track of your numbers over the course of the year, both for your own purposes, right, for your own library report and for making the annual report easier to do. And then I've already scheduled 3 webinars on how to complete the report. This is great for anybody who hasn't done it before, right? Or anybody who wants a refresher, sign up for one of those. They're already scheduled and you can find them on the continuing ed calendar there. Okay. I'm encouraging you to ask questions. I am also going to encourage you to fill out a survey at some point today, either now or later on today. I love to hear from people about the webinars, what was effective for you, what was not effective, what I could change or make clearer for future iterations. I really appreciate any input you give me on an evaluation form. So keep asking questions. And then here's my email address and telephone number if you want to reach me. I'm available. They pay me to help you. It's like the best thing ever. So you might as well use my services. Go ahead and give me an email or a call. But I want to also show you our LibGuides. So when we talk about our DLD website or our homepage, it's really this, right? It's a bunch of LibGuides. This is the homepage. Right up here is the navigation menu. This is on every single page. The statistics are under services and library statistics. So that's one way to find it. Over here in the link cloud, you can also find us under library statistics. And this search box, which is on every single page, you can try statistics there, search the guides. And that will get us to statistics for Connecticut public libraries, which is this. So when you land on statistics for Connecticut public libraries, you start with a statistical profile. So if you're not familiar with LibGuides, you'll see there's all these tabs right up here at the top. Each one of these is like a separate chapter, kind of a separate page within the guide. You can think of this guide as like an entire reference book because it is that deep. It's got many, many chapters and lots of appendices and tons of charts and data. It's a really, really rich resource all about stats. So we're going to talk about the annual report tab, which is right here, the second tab, annual report. And again, when we scroll down here, here are more tabs, right? So there's tabs, within boxes, within layers. So when you come in here, just click around. If you're looking for something, go ahead and click because you're not going to break it, or you can search, use the search box to find things. But once we're in the annual report tab, you'll see here we've got, as I said, multiple tabs. Once the 22 report form is available in Excel, it'll be posted here. And I typically post that in mid-July. So you will still have 3.5 months to complete your annual report, despite this new deadline of November 1st. So you'll be able to find the report form here. It'll show up as an Excel form right in here. And here are some links, as I mentioned, if you'd like to go ahead and register for those, kind of how to do the report form. Those are available. As we scroll back up, this tab right here, changes to the 22 report. This is everything that we just talked about. So here is where you'll find the recording on our data playlists. That should be up later today. Here's where you can find the slides that I just showed you. You can download this. Go ahead and share it with your coworkers, right? They haven't seen this. Share it with them, print it out, give everybody the info or guide them to this page. That would be fabulous. Here's in bright red letters our new due date. So you've got it right there in front of you. And then as we scroll down, here's all of the changes just listed here, all the new questions, deleted questions, COVID questions, links here. Remember that link to information about SEPA from ALA. Here's a link over to the spreadsheet for keeping track of your programs. And if you are counting views on your programs for 30 days, here's a handy guide for where you can get some help on finding those numbers and some more tutorials about Facebook. So lots of information here just about the changes to the annual report. So you'll find that there. And then as we scroll back up, this programs tab, another gold mine. So if your library is offering programs, which I'm sure you are, here's where you can find the spreadsheet to count those new programs. I did just update it last week to include the new 30-day period for counting views, just so it's right there in the spreadsheet. And I added some FAQs, and then I added in the annual report numbers so that it's a little bit easier to take data from one spreadsheet and put it in the other. So that's there. Here's videos on how to use it. Lots of information here about programs. This is a great page to keep referring to on a regular basis. Just remembering what's a program, what's an activity, what are some examples, how do we count those? I'm going to scroll down just for a second to this chart in the FAQs. Remember how we were talking about hybrid programs, and you've got that music concert, you're offering it in the auditorium. So you've got people there, you've got people watching it live stream, and you've got the views. That's how you would enter this in your program spreadsheet. There's an example here. So that's how the numbers would shake out. So those are our programs. Lots of information here about various things. So I think that I have covered everything that I wanted to tell you today. We had some great conversation about the one-on-one tech consultations, which was wonderful. That was a nice treat. So I want to say thank you for being here. I appreciate your time. Going to go back to my contact info right here. If you need to find me for any reason, please reach out. I am here for you. Want to thank you for your time today. And just let you know that I will have the recording online later. And you've got the rest of your morning free. All right. Thanks for being here, everybody. Take care.
Thank you.